Hi everyone, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And now we're gonna starting off the Freedom Convention 2021 Turkey. And I have really great distinguished speakers with me. And again, I want to welcome everyone. And this is gonna be the second Freedom Convention, which focuses on the human rights violations ongoing in Turkey, organized by Advocates of Silence Turkey. And this conference, happening on the occasion of United Nations Human Rights Day, will host 3 panel sessions in which different aspects of human rights violations, persecution, and the huge purge in Turkey will be discussed by distinguished experts and activists. The first session will touch on violations of civil and political rights, aspects of dictatorships, stigmatizations, and persecution. The panelists in the second session will discuss enforced disappearances, ill treatment, and torture in custody and detention, elderly and sick inmate situations in Turkey's jails. In the last session of the convention, speakers will talk about ethnic-based discrimination, gender-based discrimination and oppression, Turkey's Syria policies, and more, of course. Before starting off, I'd like to ask you to tweet about the event with the hashtag Human Rights Day and mentioning our account, Silence Turkey. Thank you in advance for your support. Yes, now it's time to start off the first panel, which will focus on promoting civil and political rights in Turkey. And I would like to introduce our first speaker, Arbana Jarrah. I hope that I am pronouncing your last name correctly, Arbana. Perfect. Okay. She's an investigative journalist from Kosovo, and she authored a series of investigative reports on religious extremists and Turkey's Islamic agenda operating in the Balkans. She has won numerous awards for her reporting and was a 2015 recipient of the International Woman of Courage Award from the United States State Department. The floor is yours, Arbana.
Hafsa, thank you so much, and I'm honored to be a part of
it. Arbana.
So, yes, I've been following closely the activities of the most ruthless dictator Erdogan in the Balkans. Since after the war, I started working as a journalist, and we were not really paying attention of Turkey's agenda using Kosovo, especially after the war, how we came out. So the way he started gradually in the last decade, the methods he used to basically recruit and now have thousands of people that worship him, basically. So for those who don't know, Kosovo has been under the Serbian regime, and however was Kosovo mentioned before, remind of during the 90s, the war and what happened with Albanians. So immediately after the war, Saudis in the beginning, they used the environment to start influencing the society, and then it was switched with Erdogan's agenda. So Kosovo became the newest state in Europe. Everything was new institutions, politicians, and unfortunately, most of them corrupted. So Erdogan used these politicians to spread his influence in Kosovo. First of all, started with building the mosques. In 2015, I was editor-in-chief of the second largest newspaper, ZELLE. So we conducted an investigation. We find out that the money was bypassing bank system. The money was coming cash, but also they had the mark of the TIKA, so the TIKA organization, building new mosques. Those that were built during the Ottoman Empire, they restructured, they invested money, but in meantime, they replaced imams with the imams that they've been following Erdogan's agenda. So in the beginning, it started with the religious root. And what I was alarming was his influence spread among the institutions and the media. So, sorry, what happened when we started writing, we immediately had the reaction of the Turkish ambassador in Kosovo. She wrote the letter to the government asking to arrest journalists that they've been criticizing Erdogan, saying that these journalists are enemies of these two countries. So the thing is, the dangerous thing, that they start building a sentiment of anti-journalists that were criticizing Erdogan. First of all, people there, they were not informed of ruthless dictator that Erdogan is. They didn't know what Erdogan was doing in the Turkey to his own people, because he managed to corrupt some of the media, not just in Kosovo, in Macedonia, in Bosnia, in Albania. So people were not aware of his agenda. And we were just a couple of journalists that we had courage to go investigate and reveal what was he doing. So as I mentioned, in meantime, he increased his influence, building the power of not being able to realize people what was his agenda. The second thing, he bought the main assets, the airport, the energy distribution. So he basically started having influence in the economy. And when you come up with an article saying that, look, Erdogan wants to influence our society because this way he's blackmailing EU, and he's not doing this because he loves Albanians, because he's doing this for his own political Islamic agenda. He is torturing his own people. He's putting women in jail with kids, journalists. Look what he is doing. But what happened, that they start targeting us. When they targeted me, you know what I'm facing now, even though I live in the United States with my two kids? So often you have fake news against me. During the Ramadan, they put the fake news, Arbana is against Islam. Arbana said that I will shut down all the mosques. You know why? Because this way they want to portray me as an Islamophobe in order for me not to have the influence through my articles. So this is what he managed to do in the last decade in Kosovo, in the whole Balkans, basically. I don't want to be so long. I just want to mention that what he, in 2018, during the election campaign, he was banned in Europe. He couldn't address to his potential voters and diaspora, Turkish diaspora in Europe. So what he did, he came in Bosnia. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, he organized the campaign and to address to the voters. And just recently, a couple of months ago, Erdogan attended the wedding of the daughter of the Izetbegovic in Bosnia. You see how close he became with the leaders in the Balkans. And the Western Balkans is a very important part of the Europe, aiming to be integrated in the Europe. So what, in the one side is Russia influencing Serbia, and the other side is Erdogan influencing this other part of the Western Balkans. So I am really concerned because of the future of this part of, which is a bridge between East and the West, and how, so people, we need to raise awareness on what his agenda is, because at the first moment when we write against Erdogan, they are going to say, you are against Turkey, you are against Islam, because Erdogan used Islam not to be questioned. What was he doing to his own people? So whatever I've been writing on our local politician, I never received more threats that I received when I mentioned Erdogan. And this is the sign how much influence he has outside Turkey. So I'll stop here. I don't want to take much of your time, and probably we will have questions that I'm willing to answer. Thank you so much, Hafsa.
Thank you, Arbana. And you know what? It's been a really interesting start that we saw Erdogan regime's long arms going beyond the borders of Turkey. And in that sense, our next speaker will, I think, take the issue here to the limitless aspects of dictators going beyond borders. And we have Dr. Ruth Banyat with us right now. And she is a historian and commentator on authoritarianism and propaganda. She is a professor of history and Italian studies at New York University, the recipient of Guggenheim, Fulbright, and other fellowships, an advisor to Protect Democracy. She's a regular contributor to CNN, MSNBC, and other media outlets. She publishes Lucid, a newsletter on threats to democracy. Her latest book, Strong Man, Mussolini to the Present, and I think she will touch on that book a lot, that looks at how illiberal leaders use propaganda, corruption, violence, and machismo, and how they can be defeated. And floor is yours, Dr. Banyat.
Thank you. Thank you, Hafsa, for having me here, and thank you, everybody. So I'm just going to talk. I'm going to set the frame for some of the more specific things that we'll hear in this conference. And I want to talk about the Erdogan's personality cult and how leaders like him position themselves as saviors of the nation and to try and make themselves untouchable and above the law and justify all their repression. And I want to show what's gone on in Turkey since the 2016 coup attempt conforms to this model. So, rulers like Erdogan capitalize on this idea that they're going to bring the nation to greatness. So they kind of channel utopia, that they're going to have a perfect national community and they're going to make the country, great. And often this is through modernization projects. So I'm going to share my screen. Second. And of course, Erdogan's been very busy imprinting himself on the landscape as the modernizer, building airports, rail stations, railways, highways, and the Canal Istanbul, on the Bosphorus, and more. Of course, this progress, between quotes, is often funded by foreign loans that leave the country in debt. So you have utopia, the forward looking. Then you also have nostalgia for a time of national grandeur, because the point is not just to make the nation great, it's to make the nation great again. And if you live in the States, this is Donald Trump's slogan. And so interesting, when I did the research for my book, all of the leaders do this business of great and great again. So Mussolini had the Roman Empire, and of course, Erdogan has the Ottoman Empire. And reviving the empire gives a rationale for expansionist aims. And Arbana just talked about designs on the Western Balkans. And this is for the Canal Istanbul. But new maps that were released after the coup attempt assert territorial claims in Greece and Iraq. So the most consequential time is crisis time. This is the time authoritarians love because it justifies states of emergency and scapegoatings of enemies. And it links to, it says that the state has the right to defend itself from threats to safety, but it also positions the leader like Erdogan as a victim. And so an attack on him is an attack on the nation as a whole. And all of these strongmen pose as victims. But it's very important, this victimhood complex, to the appeal they have to their people, and of course, how they justify the crackdowns that everybody else here will be examining. So the coup attempt, of course, put Turkey into a crisis state, allowed Erdogan to declare a state of emergency, and there have been on and off states of emergency, so he can consolidate his power. And of course, the terrible injustices that followed, the human rights violations, others will talk about. But I want to talk about how he used the cult of victimhood to come out of the coup stronger. And so, as so often with strongmen, you have these crisis moments and they are able to speak directly to the nation. And this is very important. So, the night of the coup, he suddenly appears on CNN Turk, and he's speaking via FaceTime. This, everybody uses FaceTime. And it's very important that, so the anchor held her phone up to the camera, and you see how small he looks and how vulnerable he looks. So this humanized him. And then, of course, he used the first person plural. He said, we will overcome this, go to the streets. And so somehow this FaceTime business really drew viewers into this kind of narrative, and it really helped him. And as we know, even though he started all his repression, his approval ratings went up to 70% in the months after the coup. And so, of course, predictably, the coup has become, the anniversary of the coup becomes an occasion to celebrate his survival, but also remind everybody that he's threatened. And the more years go by from the coup, the more he has to up the scale of the threat. And so, for just an example, in 2019, he linked it to the West's attempt to subject our entire nation to slavery. So keep an eye on these anniversaries of the coup. So I just want to mention two other things he does, part of his personality, called first his habit of crying in public. And there's a really good research by Senem Aslan at Bates College, who shows that these tears are like a performance, and they increase in frequency when his power is unstable. So he cried 20 times in public after the Gezi Park protests in 2013, and he cried a lot after the coup attempt. And so here he's being vulnerable. And so the vulnerability is in relation to the repression. And I like this headline by an Irish newspaper because it's one of the few that it links the crying to the repression. So you don't see that often enough in coverage. And then there are the insult suits, the last point I'll make. The scale of these insult suits is staggering. More than 36,000 people investigated in 2019 alone. And their psychological power lies in their randomness, right? Anybody could be hit with one of these insult suits. So it keeps up the fiction that Erdogan is constantly being attacked and threatened and criticized. So I think that's the end of my PowerPoint. Stop sharing my screen. So I will continue to call public attention to the ways that Erdogan is using classic strongman tactics to present himself as good for the nation, and instead is acting in destructive ways, not least in forcing so many talented professionals to have to leave their homeland, many at this conference. And we need to hear more about what's happening in Turkey. So I thank you for holding this event.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ruth. And you know what? Your remarks about the aspects of the dictators is really, striking, because as far as I understand that these dictators are not just playing the cards of, using the proxies of diplomatic or political issues, but as I see that there are psychological approaches, there are sociological approaches, which are very clever and very well planned, right?
Very.
Yeah,
and he's using all of them.
Yeah, we very closely witnessed that. Thank you so much for these significant remarks. And now we have our third speaker with us right now, Emre Turcotte, and he's a postdoctoral researcher at the Hardy School Center for Fundamental Rights. He also holds a Reconstitution Fellowship, valid for 2021 and for 2022. And Emre received his PhD in international law from Ghent University. Emre, I'm pronouncing correctly, right? Ghent.
But it's okay.
Yeah, in December 2020, and remains an affiliated researcher at the Ghent Rolin Jacquemin's International Law Institute. And his research covers a variety of fields within the domains of public international law, international human rights law, and comparative constitutional law, including states of emergency, derogations, emergency power, counterterrorism, self-determination movements, international law in domestic courts, transnational judicial dialogue, and judicial politics in authoritarian regimes. Oh my God, I'm breathless. And Emre previously taught at the Riga Graduate School of Law, held the Swedish Institute Fellowship at Uppsala University, and the DAAD Fellowship at Hertie School. Along with his academic work, Emre is frequently contacted by NGOs and global media platforms to give expert opinions on issues of human rights, international law, and Turkish law. He also serves as a legal consultant and expert witness on Turkish law to several private entities. And floor is yours, Emre. Thank you for attending this important organization.
Thank you so much, Hafsa. Really happy to be part of the convention. And many thanks again for the kind invitation. Well, it wasn't part of my introduction or bio, but I have recently taken part in this civil society initiative called Turkey Tribunal. So when I received your kind invitation, I thought this would be a good venue to talk about it and possibly create more awareness. So it is mainly in this capacity as one of the rapporteurs of the tribunal that I am here with you today. I have prepared a couple of PowerPoint slides. I will share them now. All right. Thumbs up if you can see. All right. Well, again, I prepared a couple of slides on the idea, organizational structure of the tribunal. But first, some pictures or images from the Turkey Tribunal proceedings that took place in Geneva in September this year. I mean, as you see here, the tribunal, the venue for the tribunal was really packed, and it attracted huge attention from the international media and civil society organizations. Here is the presiding judges. I will talk about who they were just in a bit. And on the right-hand side, or maybe on the left-hand side, we had the registry comprised of three really established lawyers and academics. They were mainly responsible for receiving reports, testimonies, and with all sorts of procedural documents. So they greatly helped the judges to deliver the final opinion. Rapporteurs presented their reports. So the final opinion of the tribunal was based on these 6 thematic reports. I will talk about them. Witnesses were heard, like 15. There were 15 witnesses from almost all circle of Turkish society. There were witnesses with the Kurdish origin, from the Gülen movement, from the LGBTI community, judges, prosecutors, journalists, academics gave their testimonies as witnesses. Importantly, there were 5 observers of the tribunal, and they were in charge of making sure that the rules of procedure of the tribunal were followed. And among the observers, there were 2 European Parliament members, some leaders from civil society, so on and so forth. Now, I mean, if you take a look at this organizational structure, you would see that there were, many people who really worked hard to make the tribunal happen. But I will just briefly talk about the initiative taker, who deserves a special mention, as well as the judges of the tribunal. So the initiative taker and the coordinator of the tribunal was Professor Johan van der Lanotte, who is one of the most respected law professors in Belgium. And he also had an amazing career in Belgian politics and held different ministerial positions in Belgium. And the steering committee or the organizing committee of the tribunal was mainly, guided the entire process of the tribunal, steered the process, if I may say. So there were the rectors of Belgium's two universities, Professor Rick van der Walle and Professor Carlo Powels, as well as former president of Belgian Constitutional Court, Professor Mark Bossuit, were also part of the steering committee. So the judges, the Turkey tribunal had 6 judges with highly extensive experience in human rights issues. Professor Françoise Baroness Tulkens was the president of the court. She held the vice presidency of the European Court of Human Rights for like over 10 years. So she's one of the most established scholars when it comes to European human rights law. Professor Georgia Malin-Verne and Professor Lady Bianco also were also former judges at the European Court of Human Rights, and they also held membership to the Venice Commission. Justice Johan van der Westhuizen was the former member of the South African Constitutional Court. So, I mean, as you see here, judges have been appointed from different locations and jurisdictions with really extensive experience. Now, the tribunal looked at 6 thematic issues, and these were torture, enforced disappearances, press freedom, impunity, judicial independence and access to justice, and crimes against humanity. And these reports have been drafted by rapporteurs with substantial experience in human rights, and I was really lucky and privileged to take part as one of the rapporteurs of the tribunal. So, as I said, the torture had 6 reports on these thematic issues, and the final opinion of the tribunal were substantially based on this report, right? So the opinion of the tribunal was pronounced, at the end of the tribunal on 24 September this year. So what did this final opinion say, or what did it find basically? I mean, I'm just sharing a couple of passages from the final opinion. Now, I mean, as we all aware, sadly, torture and ill treatment has always been a specific serious problem in Turkey. And then in terms of torture, the tribunal found that the torture practices is systematic and organized in Turkey. And in terms of enforced disappearances, and again, as we all aware, Turkey has a long history of state-sponsored abductions or enforced disappearances, particularly in the late 1980s and 1990s. And this was also a recurring theme. But in more recent years, especially after the 2016 attempted coup, there seems to be a new ingredient or element to this problem. Extraterritorial renditions, and many UN reports covered it. But just to remind you of the fact that the Turkey state has allegedly abducted over 100 individuals extraterritorially and transferred them back to Turkey. Of course, this creates a myriad of human rights violations. But in terms of enforced disappearances, both in Turkey and abroad, the tribunal found that this was part of a state action towards perceived political opponents, which may, together with torture, which may amount to crimes against humanity, because these 2 crimes are international crimes. Now, in terms of press freedom, the Turkey tribunal noted with serious concern a number of specific issues regarding the press freedom, such as judicial harassment of journalists, and the Turkish government's unjust meddling of the journalism profession, and impunity. I mean, there are massive and serious human rights violations in Turkey, but there seems to be no accountability. So no one is being, held accountable for these massive crimes, and thus culture of impunity, as the tribunal found. And in terms of impunity, the tribunal also acknowledged a couple of 5 specific problems or root causes of the impunity. These basically reinforce each other. So in terms of judicial independence and justice, I mean, the Turkish judiciary has been severely damaged, and what the tribunal found in terms of judiciary in Turkey is that I mean, you can't trust the judiciary in Turkey, because the kernel of the judiciary is really in serious crisis. And crimes against humanity, which is the overarching topic, especially in relation to torture and unenforced disappearances, which are, as I said, international crimes and can be prosecuted internationally. So these practices regarding torture and enforced disappearances could amount to crimes against humanity, given their widespread and systematic nature. So what's next, right? I mean, the tribunal is not the end of this good fight. So there will be fold plan. There is a threefold plan after the tribunal. So one is universal jurisdiction. So the tribunal is continuing its studies on the principle of universal jurisdiction, and it means that a state can initiate legal proceedings for human rights violators, right? So the principle, and this is the future of international criminal law rests, right? I mean, many states are adopting the principle of universal jurisdiction, and the idea is gaining more and more traction among the states, the international community. Just to give one example, I think it was this July this year that a Syrian doctor was charged of torturing people during the Syrian criminal law by German authorities, and the Syrian doctor's trials are ongoing. But so the idea here is that Germany has put the Syrian doctor on trial because it's holding these trials under the principle of universal jurisdiction. Right. So another related development is the so-called Magnitsky Act. So, for example, the European Union adopted a new sanction mechanism, which was largely modeled on United States Magnitsky Act in 2012. So what this Magnitsky Act do is that certain states, this act basically provides the legal ground to target human rights violators by such measures as travel bans, assets freezing, and we also see that a number of countries like the United Kingdom and Canada are adopting similar mechanisms. So the tribunal is trying to somehow revitalize the political processes to adopt or implement the European Magnitsky Act. This is one of the plans of the tribunal. And the third plan is a possible or potential application to the International Criminal Court. So a team of experts, including academics, lawyers, are currently working on this really gigantic application. While irrespective of its prospect of success, this will give an important warning to the human rights violators. And again, this is one of the main plans of the Turkey tribunal. Well, just a final thing is that in order to keep up this good work, the Turkey tribunal relies on your support. So feel free to follow or support the activities of the Turkey tribunal, and do donate. So just a suggestion. Okay, this will be the end of the slides. Thank you, Afsa.
Thank you, Emre. And you know what, laying out the problems, raising awareness is a very first step of the human rights work. And then the action step comes, forward. And Turkey tribunal's work is really remarkable at this point because, taking the issue to the universal and global human rights organizations for ending the impunity in terms of dictators and governmental crimes, crimes against humanity. It's a very important work. Thank you so much. And it's an amazing presentation that you have made. And I am following the comments on YouTube and I am receiving lots of questions. I'm gonna ask them at the end of the speeches of all the panelists. Just stay tuned. And we have our last speaker, but not the least today, Mr. from South Africa. And this is a really diverse speakers panel from Sweden, from United States, from South Africa. And the last speaker, advocate attorney Mufana Gwala. He's an anti-apartheid activist in South Africa and recently appointed by the President of South Africa as a member of the Information Regulator South Africa. He's an executive member of National Democratic Lawyers Bar Association with more than 10 years experience in public administration matters, employment and labor, constitutional litigation, procurement disputes, commercial litigation, and alternative dispute resolution. He has also served as an executive member of the Law Society of South Africa. Welcome again, Mr. Gwala, and floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and greetings to all the speakers as well and the people who are listening around the world. I hope you can hear me very well.
Yes, perfect.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you very well.
Yes. I have been listening very carefully to the speakers that came before me, and it is clear that the situation is very dire in Turkey. And what has attracted my attention most is that I see that before the advent or before the rule of Erdogan, it would seem when I looked at some of the safeguards for the independence of the judiciary and the independence of the profession, which, I mean, internationally we know they are very key to the safeguarding of human rights in any country. And dictators, they always target the independence of the judiciary and make sure that they staff courts with people who make decisions in their favor, and they undermine the practice of law by professional lawyers, because lawyers, we know sometimes they can be the voice of human rights and the defenders of human rights in the midst of adversity. What has attracted my attention is that, I noticed that Turkey has a code, a code which is called regulated by law number 1136. What is interesting about that code, it basically makes it difficult or almost impossible to prosecute lawyers under normal circumstances. But what has happened with Erdogan's crackdown, it would seem that he's reversed all those gains. And it's quite interesting to notice that there seems to be a systematic targeting of the judiciary and to undermine the independence of the judiciary, and even to intimidate and frustrate the efforts of lawyers to represent their client. From the reports that I've looked at, for an example, there are about 1,600 lawyers arrested, and some of them without trial, and only about 450 have been convicted. And if you look at the sentences range from on average about 15 years, which is it's quite interesting and shocking that the state would systematically target, especially lawyers, in that fashion. I mean, I lived in apartheid South Africa. At least, even if being Black in South Africa was a crime in itself, but at least the apartheid state, created some semblance of mechanisms where people could believe that you could get some justice in court. But I think it's common cause that in most cases, they would find a way to circumvent that kind of process. I know, for an example, I mean, the popular case of the Rivonia trial of the former president, Nelson Mandela, and the rest of his comrades, where there was a trial, but all of us knew that that trial, I mean, it was a farce, but at least there was a trial. People were given an opportunity sort of to appear and appear to be defending himself. But in Turkey, it seems to be non-existent. I mean, the first people amongst the first people who were targeted are the very same people who are supposed to be the voice of the people during these trying times: journalists, judges, lawyers, and professionals in general. So you can see that the Erdogan regime is trying to target the intelligentsia that can challenge his rule. And I think he knows that by undermining that part of society, it makes it easy for you as a dictator, according to him, to do as he pleases. But I'm quite impressed that in the midst of that, we still have things like the tribunals that our colleague was talking about. And it's interesting, to look at the composition of that tribunal, because it reminds me of the Cuban Five. I don't know, many of us know about the Cuban Five. These are 5 people who were arrested in America, and they were branded as Cuban spies, and they were arbitrarily sentenced to life imprisonment, I think some of them to death. And there was an international tribunal held, and there was a judge amongst the judges, there was a judge from South Africa, I'll come to that name, but there was a judge from South Africa. And, that tribunal proceeded, and eventually it found those people not guilty. But to our surprise, I mean, the American government was pressured to release those Cuban Five. I know that I had the privilege of meeting those Cuban Fives when they visited South Africa. So what I'm trying to say is that some of these instruments, we may take them for granted, but they work. What is shocking, when I compare the Turkey situation and with apartheid South Africa, like I said, in South Africa, even if we know that, I mean, even the trials and what have you were fast, but at least people could be arrested, brought to court, even though they were tortured, some of them killed. If we were unfortunate, some were killed, but some kind of pressure was brought to bear to the South African government to know that some of these things, they could not do them with impunity. I mean, I want to make one example. There's a senior leader of the ANC who passed away a few days ago. His name is Ishmael Ibrahim. The story of Ishmael Ibrahim is quite interesting. I mean, he was arrested by apartheid South Africa and sentenced, I think, if I'm not mistaken, to 15 years in jail. He served the sentence, he was released, and then he went into exile. But the apartheid security forces, he was in the neighboring country of Lesotho and Swaziland. The apartheid security forces, crossed the border. They abducted him. They brought him to South Africa. And when they arrived in South Africa, they charged him with terrorism, sabotage, and treason. And he went to court. He was sentenced, but at least he appealed against the sentence. And eventually, the apartheid government, judiciary, released him. It found that his arrest was unlawful, and his trial was a farce, and he was released. So I'm saying we should not lose hope in these instruments that are being used. And I think it is important to also note that in South Africa, we relied heavily on international solidarity, on sanctions against the apartheid government. Mass mobilization in South Africa also played. I was one of those people who was actively involved in the mass democratic movement. That works as well. It makes it easy for support from other countries. And what I'm saying is that it would seem the system in Turkey was working well before the coup, or the so-called coup that took place, and the things have gone south. If you look at what has happened, children in jail, at least in apartheid South Africa, they could respect people like children, and sometimes they would respect women, even though they were still treated, badly, but at least they would try and not put children in jail. But what is happening in Turkey is very shocking. So I do not want to repeat much that has been said by speakers before me, but I want to emphasize the point that it is through international solidarity that the Turkey issue can be resolved. It is through us continuing to put pressure on the Erdogan government to promote and respect the independence of the judiciary, because it is only through an independent judiciary that can speak truth to power. We know that even in South Africa, even during democracy, at least an independent judiciary managed to bring sense sometimes to some of the abuses by state. And therefore, what I'm saying is that we need to mobilize our people all over the globe. And finally, what is also very shocking about what is happening in Turkey, they don't just arrest lawyers, they even arrest leaders of the profession. I'm told that the president of the Bar Association were arrested, the president of the Bar Association of Konya, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, the president of the Bar Association of Trabzon, Set, and Gumushani. So it's clear that Erdogan has identified the think tank of the nation as the #1 enemy to his rule, So we need to continue to put pressure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Guala. You pointed out two really important issues, including how it is important for the judiciary to be independent and, working properly, and how the operation of judiciary members, will take the country to a really dismal position. And also your emphasis on international solidarity, that's really important. And overall, the Turkey tribunals work, Advocates of Silence Turkey's work, and all individual works in terms of international solidarity, I think, and you also stressed that this will take the perpetrators of crime against humanity before the justice sooner or later. As you said, we have to be hopeful, and we have to be, keeping up the good work. Thank you so much. Now I have a couple of questions. If all the speakers can turn their cameras on, I'm gonna refer to the questions that are directed to you. So the first question is for you, Ruth. First of all, they thank you for your great talk. And unfortunately, your presentation somehow wasn't, reflected on the screen. I'm so sorry, I couldn't understand what was the, problem in terms of technical issues, but, maybe you want to share it while you are answering the questions, you are more than welcome. And the question is that, as we see Erdogan's health is deteriorating and may step down or die any day. This is the question coming from the audience. And based on your experience with strongman, what is expected after Erdogan? And I'm gonna connect this question to the next one because they are related. How do you think the level of operation may change after Erdogan, or will it change? Does he have any other, have another strongman after him, or will his legacy fall as he falls?
Yeah, thank you for these great questions. So there's interesting research that it's not always the most optimistic research that shows that often after a strongman, you don't have democratization, but that's especially if you enter into state of civil war. So like in Libya, right? You weren't able to have democratization. So it's hard to know what to expect. I mean, there are very encouraging signs in Turkey, such as the election of the mayor of Istanbul, and how he fought Imamoglu. And I wrote about this in my book. It's extremely important, the model of politics, a kind of anti-authoritarian model that he's following. And being an observant Muslim, he's able to reach a kind of cross constituency. So that matters, that there are figures in positions of power who could lead a movement to have something different. So that's a positive. Now, of course, what Erdogan's done to all of these guys, you can't talk about successors, and they structure their governments so that no one, anybody who's very talented or could become a rival has to be marginalized. And so it was very interesting that Erdogan, who's president, also kind of occupied the prime minister post or nullified it. And that's typical. You don't want anybody around in a position so they could form their own fiefdom. And the other way he does this is through corruption, right? The cronyism, so that people are paid off as long as they're loyal. And we in the United States, we obviously, Donald Trump ruled in a democracy, but all of these dynamics, we saw them happening here too in miniature, let's say. So there, it's not clear who would be an Erdogan handpicked successor. But I published a piece last year in the New Yorker about what happens when the strongman falls ill because of COVID, and because they have this machismo, this personality cult, that they're invincible and they need people to fear them, and that's why I talked about the insult suits. The idea of illness is, it means something different in the strongman state. So we will have to see, but Erdogan's followed all of the dynamics and government structures to make sure that there's no obvious successor. And sometimes it's somebody in the family, but we don't know yet.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ruth, for your answer. And this question is for all the speakers. Please jump in if you want to say anything on that. So, hundreds of thousands of innocent lives are kept in jails, or some of them are losing their lives. Lots of, humanity crisis is ongoing in Turkey or abroad. And the international human rights organizations or the international human rights community, okay, there are lots of actions that are taken, but still it's not enough. What should be done in terms of to force Erdogan to leave the power to end all this persecution? To, accelerate and trigger the international human rights community. Anyone who wants to share their remarks, reflections on that issue?
Well, I can say a couple of things, Elsa.
Yes, please, Emre.
Well, great question. This is a long-standing debate, but I don't think there's any perfect plan, right? Because, you know, as an expert on international human rights law, the machinery that the international human rights law has is quite flawed, right? So it is really unlikely to make a different an impact on the you know if the state of affairs are regarding the sovereignty of national authorities, and that's what Turkey did, right? There was an attempted coup for which the Turkish government did not disclose anything, so we still don't know whether the Gülen movement was behind the coup. There's no transparency, there is nothing. But after that, Turkey declared a state of emergency, and it provided the legal grounds for the Turkish government to distract the human rights, you know, on a systematic level massively, right? So there's no perfect plan. So we also have to we also have to, you know, revitalize the civil society in Turkey. And what, for example, as Mr. Gavala said, the bar associations are doing, you know, are speaking up for human rights. There is a resilient civil society in Turkey, and you know, at the same time, the opposition parties are gaining traction. So there are, as Ruth said, there are signs of hope. But I'm quite pessimistic in terms of whether there will be a change completely after Erdogan, you know, loses power, because there has been a complete transformation of the legal regime, judiciary, human rights in Turkey. So the human rights has been distracted systematically. So it requires a complete overhaul of the system. So it's a long process. The point is, it'll be a long process. We just have to, you know, keep up the good fight. We just have to, you know, again, it's a long process. So we should not, you know, lose our hopes. Keep up the good work. Eventually, there will be accountability. So we just have to, you know, pass our days with that idea, with that hope that things will be fixed eventually.
Thank you, Emre. Arbana, you're going to say something? Yeah.
I think that coming from Kosovo, no, you can change the government. If the society is tired after like 10 or 20 years, you're going to try, and then you will see what was your choice. It was better, but in this case, it's on Turkish people to decide. But I do not see that much of the effort of the Western powers to take real actions against Erdogan. It was the good decision by the President Biden not to invite Turkey at the Summit of Democracy, because this is the signal on what he's doing. But in meantime, we know that Turkey purchased the anti-missile from the Putin. He's a part of NATO. And we didn't have just the condemnation. I think it's not enough. You need the real action from the NATO. He's a part of NATO and he's working against NATO. I know that he threatens Europe in this case with the immigrants, with the Syrian immigrants. But Erdogan, when he is not in the good position, he knows to negotiate. See, for example, with how he uses the Palestine issue for his own agenda. He doesn't care about the Palestinians. Now that he is facing the economic problem, now he is approaching to Israel saying that, yes, I'm going to send the Turkish ambassador. You can send Israeli ambassador. I'm going to sit and discuss with you, because he needs Israel. And this is the message to his supporters to see that he doesn't care about Palestinian in this case. He doesn't care about Albanians. He has his own agenda. And that's why West should be more critique, not just to condemn on what he is doing. Having this many women in the jail and children, it's not enough just to release a report. You need to take actions against Erdogan.
Arbana, that's really important. Yes, in international human rights, discourse, naming and shaming and condemnations are important, but sanctions or that kind of actions are really important to end the dictatorships.
Unfortunately, there are Turkish people that are going to pay the price when you set sanction against Turkey. But this way, you will raise awareness among his supporters. And then probably during the election, things will change. As Ruth mentioned, the election in Istanbul, that he lost it.
Thank you.
I would just add one thing. You've always got to go after these guys' money. That's all they care about is money and power. And so there's some movement in the United States, which has been a big culprit of, funding the offshore finance and protecting their money. There's now a little bit of movement to have an anti-kleptocracy caucus in Congress. But also, Erdogan's one of the many autocrats he's got so many American PR firms working for him. It is very important that Biden's taking a different stance, because I was very struck, we have so much coverage in the United States of Trump and Putin, and we need that's all true. But the foreign leader that Trump spoke to the most was Erdogan. And they were very close. And William Barr, the Attorney General, was doing all kinds of deals for, corrupt Turkish banks. And so you have to have a pressure campaign against to go after their money. And people mentioned the Magnitsky Act. There's some movement. It's just very slow. It's a slow process.
Yeah, you're right. But using the economic means and proxies, I think it's the best and shortest way to stop dictators. And the last question, coming to the end, it's for you, Mr. Guvala, actually. And the question says that how can we trust the judiciary who sold their hearts and minds to autocratic leaders? It's ironic, right? And should we expect fair judiciary about oppressed people altogether, or case by case?
Okay, maybe as a quick response, we know that you can't paint everybody with the same brush. Even in the midst of adversity, it does not necessarily mean that all the judges that are there and all the lawyers that are there that are supported by Erdogan actually support what Erdogan is doing. In South Africa, for an example, we had to come up with a systematic way of transforming the judiciary by putting additional people, even if there were still people who were judges during apartheid times, and some of them very conservative, some of them who sent people to the gallows, but were able to systematically, transform the judiciary. So what I'm saying, something can be done to transform judiciary, even if we know that at the moment it's completely broken down from what I'm hearing from other speakers. But there's something I also wanted to quickly comment on, the issue about sanction. It reminds me, in South Africa, Ronald Reagan, for an example, and Margaret Thatcher were one of the people who always advanced the argument that if they impose sanctions on apartheid South Africa, it will affect the poor, meaning us, the most oppressed and the vulnerable. But the world did not buy the story. And if I remember very well, pressure was even put in Congress. I remember Ronald Reagan vetoed a decision to impose sanctions in South Africa, but Congress was able to mobilize both houses of Congress in the United States. And eventually they were able to pass a law that imposed sanctions to South Africa. And one of the former ministers of finance during the apartheid government, Mr. Barren du Plessis, admitted that, when de Klerk made that speech on that day when he unbanned organization and released Mandela, he had no choice because the apartheid state was bankrupt. He even go to an extent of saying it was like somebody had given you a mortgage loan and he phones you today and say, look, I'm canceling that loan and I want the full amount tomorrow. So sanctions can work, I agree. It can work in the sense of mobilizing the population of Turkey, the people in Turkey, to rise up against the Erdogan government. It can mobilize other countries in the world to mobilize and impose sanction against the autocrat government. Like Ruth said, I mean, it is the money that keeps these dictators in power. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the money, the key to, maybe everything in the world. And it was an amazing discussion, a very interactive, a very productive discussion. Thank you so much for your significant and amazing remarks. And I want to end the session with a wish that came from the audience on the occasion of the Human Rights Day. Actually, it's a bit, emotional, but I want to share with you. We are waiting for the days when we will not remember the 10th of December with sadness. And yeah, and I'm gonna add that I wish, maybe you wanna join me in this wish. I wish this Human Rights Day, all the people, not just in Turkey, all around the world, we will enjoy democracy, justice, and equalities. Again, thank you so much to all the speakers on behalf of Advocates of Silence Turkey and audience. And thank you to the audience that bearing with us. It was an amazing and very productive discussion with all the speakers. Let's meet just in 55 minutes for the second panel. And until then, take care and see you.